So this is leading the line. So the world we work in has changed over the last 2.5 years, and many working environments are different, or different places to the ones we left in March 2020. 2020? We're in 23? That is crazy. Isn't it? As you get older, the years just get faster, don't they? I used to think, I can't wait to be 13, and now I'm nearly 43. You're meant to say, what, Gunnar? You don't look 43. I know. So what does this mean for future leaders? You know, our children, if you've got children, grandchildren, they're thinking about nature more than we are. To be honest, my son forced us to be vegans for about a week. And it was hard. It was so hard. But I could see why, you know, and it made us think as a family about what we were doing. But also, what are the qualities that we need to build the responsible, resilient, future-proof businesses, and how do we seed these ideas, and how do we make sure that people with lived experience of social issues are able to contribute to solving those problems as well? You know, a lot of us in this room will have the privilege to be able to fight for sustainability and make sure that a lot of underprivileged people benefit from that as well. And what is the next generation demanding from the businesses it supports, and how do we make sure that entrepreneurs now and in the future have the skills to take us forward? So we have two amazing ladies on this panel. We have Professor Sarah Underwood from Manchester Metropolitan University, so you are right at home. So Sarah is the Professor of Entrepreneurial Practice and has recently moved to join Manchester Met Uni's Head of Department. Can we have a round of applause for that, please? So before arriving in Manchester, Sarah spent, after a long career at University of Leeds, where she helped to establish enterprise as a discipline, and later set up the executive education offer, working with hundreds of growing SMEs on their leadership and strategic development. So we are in good hands. No pressure, Sarah. And then we have Nuha Hasan, alumni mentor at Bright Green Futures. So Nuha is currently a student at the University of Oxford, studying English, language and literature, and she's been engaging in climate spaces since she was 16 and hopes to continue to learn and make a meaningful impact. The funny thing is, before we got your attention, we were talking about what our names all mean, and Nuha means intelligence. Sarah means princess, and my name, get this, you're not going to believe it, it means God's gift, and I'm not even joking. I'm seriously not even joking. It means God's given a gift, so you can't even shorten it, because if you say goo, it just means given. So it's all messed up, so it's got to be gunan. So it does mean God. It's not a chatterfly. It actually it really does. So we'll be sharing the mic a little bit while we sort out another mic. So Nuha, I want to come to you first. So as we learn to navigate remote and hybrid working, what does that mean for future leaders?
I think the most important thing to think about is like connection to nature and like climate spaces, especially because the last 2 years we've been working from like home a lot. We've been kind of disconnected from outside spaces and kind of spaces that encourage like thinking about climate and nature. So I did my A-levels the last 2 years, and a lot of that was done online, and we didn't get to go out a lot. And so it was really weird being separated from like parks and stuff in my walk to school or things like that, because usually when you're thinking about like natural spaces, that kind of encourages you to think about like how you can give to your community or you can do things for climate. So if we're working hybrid, we have to think about how we can encourage thinking about like climate spaces and natural learning.
So, you know, does it matter to you so if you are working remotely, are you really stuck on what the business represents that you go and maybe hot desk or just working as a space?
I think maybe unconsciously you're kind of aware of like, so if you're working from home, it's like you're just in one space, you're comfortable, you're in like a bubble almost. You don't have to think about what's going on outside necessarily, unless it's something that you're directly talking about. But even if you're like on your way to work, you pass by like a park or trees or whatever, if you're aware of your natural world, you kind of think about like how you can get involved in it. and things like that. So it's easier, I think, to think about climate spaces when you're, I guess, in contact with them.
Sarah, what are the qualities that we need to build responsible, resilient, future-proof businesses, and how do we seed these ideas?
Thanks very much. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit from the perspective of working with lots and lots of growing small businesses, and from the basis of the fact that most of the sort of programs that we run and things, this is a key theme that comes up again and again. And a lot of it's driven by the fact that I'm working with rooms full of people who know they need to know some things about this, but don't quite know what that is, and are navigating something that seems incredibly complex. And of course, that's because it is. And certainly, even if we look at the issue that we were just talking about there in terms of hybrid working, you're looking as a business owner at the space you're providing for your employees, but also as a leader, how are you able to offer that coaching and mentoring for more junior members of staff if you've got people in and out of the office and there are not those sort of shared cultural practices that they're picking up. So these things are actually really complicated. And one of the things that I would always get people to start off with is thinking about how purposeful is thinking about the sustainability and resilience of your business in all of your decision making. So when there are things that have to be decided, purchased, who you want to work with, all those, there's a myriad of things that are already kind of gone through. Obviously there's going to be things like price and quality and reputation, things, and how can we make sustainability, being a better business, part of that decision-making criteria so that it's built in all the way through? And that can be quite a simple thing to just add in to a decision-making kind of matrix as you're going through. What can be easier? And the other thing that I just very quickly want to say is, you know, if you're faced with this and you don't have all the answers as what you can do, then there are plenty of people around who do and start to network and share. I mean, this is fantastic. I will imagine you'll go away from today with already 100 ideas of small things that you could do slightly differently. But we are educating the next generation of leaders in a way that they're going to expect to come into a workforce that sort of has an understanding of what they mean to be sustainable. And you can start reaching out to them now in terms of thinking about projects that they might want to work with and things that they could get involved with to help you to navigate some of this. So start small, but build it in all the way through your decision making.
Now, lots of SMEs do have that belief that being sustainable can be quite expensive. So what are some of the, I don't know if you can answer this question, but is it as expensive as what people think it is? What are the small changes we could make?
So I think it's a really, really pertinent point, and it's definitely, I mean, at the moment, small businesses are being squeezed in every direction, so this is something that needs to be considered. And I think, again, it's having that purposeful decision making so that, for example, you know, I've worked with a business recently, they had a suite of delivery vehicles. They're going to need replacing, but they're not looking at replacing all of them wholesale right now. They're going to, but as they come up for renewal, they're going to start looking at bringing in electric vehicles into their into what they want to do, and making sure that it's done in a more in a way that the business can actually you know, take that kind of financial hit. But what I would say is there's lots of things that you could start to do that don't necessarily have much of a cost attached to them, if any at all. And a lot of that is around making sure that you're making use of the digital things that can help to support you, because there's an awful lot of things that small businesses still do because they haven't necessarily looked at some of the digital ways in which you can navigate some of these things.
Fantastic. Nuha, let me come to you. So how do we make sure that people with lived experience of social issues are able to contribute to solving them? Because, you know, we sometimes, so I'm going to be quite political. So sometimes it's the people at the top who make decisions for the people at the bottom, so to speak, without that lived experience. So how do we make sure that we're getting people involved in actually helping us solve those issues that really affect them more than most?
I think like the main thing would be communication, effective communication. You need to get people who are being affected by these issues involved in like your planning process and what you're gonna do, because sometimes we have like people at the top making decisions from their experience and not being aware that actually what they're doing might not actually be helpful. So just people who have like actual experience being affected from these issues, having representation and having a part making like decisions and being part of the process.
So do you want to contribute to that?
Well, I mean, I think that's a great thing from a business perspective to think about who is in your customer base and the voices that they have in the decisions that you're making about where your business is going. If you've got the opportunity to talk to them before you're starting to make big decisions and get them involved in that so that they're along that journey with you, that's actually really good business practice anyway. That would be something we'd be saying even if it wasn't such a fantastic issue that we need to raise a profile of. So, there's lots of things you could do.
So I know in Liverpool, the National Museums have started a committee called the Respect Committee of different people from the community. So whether it's the Chinese community, the black community, but people that they know, they've brought them together. And anytime they're looking at decisions or outreach projects, they talk to their committee members. So they're like board members, but they help them with decisions. I think that's always really important to look at your surroundings and think, is this surrounding representative of the people we want to help, rather than go in with this this kind of saviour mentality. Is our business actually supporting the social issues that we are trying to engage in? So what is the next generation demanding from businesses it supports? So what is the next generation demanding from the businesses?
Ethical practices. That's probably the main thing. I think a lot of times we look at businesses, especially bigger businesses, and a lot of times they have really unethical labor practices or climate practices. And I think right now, for the younger generation, that is the main issue: how you're using natural resources, how you're treating your employees, labor practices, things like that, I think.
And certainly some of the things that I've talked to business owners about is that they're experiencing this more as younger people are coming into their business at interview. They're asking, what are you doing? Where is the evidence that the things that you're doing have an impact? So not only making sure that you are starting down this journey or maybe further down already, but you're able to articulate that in a way that is meaningful to them is really, really important, giving them opportunities to get involved.
And that's so interesting because, my son's 11 and already he's at that stage, he's in senior school and a lot of them are talking about these things, and not all of them, but some of them who have got that conscious mind of clothing and brands, they're really looking into it. So I think for a lot of businesses, it might seem like it's tedious to go through the sustainability journey, but actually, in the next 10 years, it's your business that these young people are going for rather than, the big conglomerates. So I think it's definitely something to consider. And I think it's a big one. So how do we make sure that entrepreneurs now and in the future have the skills to we've touched on this, but take this forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of if there are government programs that are being put on, of which there's lots around, fantastic ones here, by the way, they have this embedded as part of their training now, so that there were ways in which business owners can kind of or leaders can now start to access curated things, so you're not being overloaded with lots of things that you don't necessarily understand and can't make sense of it in your actual business. So there are lots of resources in those programs. But I think the other thing is there's a lot of people trying to navigate this without necessarily the right answers. There isn't a checklist somewhere you can go through and say, oh, I do all of these things and it works for us. So it's about making sure it's front and centre of your conversations, but talking in to your peer group of people who are doing things across different sectors and picking up ideas that work in other places that you can then bring back into business.
So now I want to ask you, you've been really, interested in climate spaces since the age of 16. What was the catalyst that got you into that space, that, wanting to see, that kind of environment and a better environment?
So I really started getting into it over lockdown when we were all inside, and I felt really disconnected from the outside world. And so I had to actively seek out spaces that were talking about climate change and these kinds of things. And there are obviously a lot of programs, communities online if you look for them. And that's how I got involved with Bright Green Future, which is an environmental leadership program for younger people. And I was that was kind of the start of it for me. And obviously since then I became more aware of all the ways our society is contributing to climate problems and how we can start approaching them and addressing them.
What would you say hurts you the most when you look at climate spaces and how we treat the environment, and what would you say hurts you the most about that?
I think a lot of times we tend to treat climate problems like a side project, as a hobby instead of something to be actually concerned about, and put front and center in our daily life and practices. It's kind of a lot of times we see companies using climate issues as a PR thing instead of oh, here's we're actually trying to fix our issues and help out. It's that bigger companies especially use buzzwords a lot to try and gain, I guess, a larger customer base. And I think that's a really big problem because the issues aren't actually being addressed. It's kind of only being used for attention. Yes,
yeah. And we see that quite a bit, especially with actually I wouldn't even say just with big businesses. It's for a lot of small and large businesses do this, and sometimes it's chasing the money. It's become a big thing of let's chase the money rather than we are fully invested in this. For you, Sarah, similar, for small businesses, give us what's the step that what's the one thing that we could take away? We'll start with.
I would say put it on your agenda. So there'll be regular meetings happening. There'll be maybe things that are going on that are discussed and agreed with the senior management team, and make sure that this is something that's incorporated regularly into your conversations. What are the small things that we could do, and try, if you're feeling overwhelmed by it, I appreciate that you're sitting here today as a kind of very bought-in audience, so maybe a lot of you are further down this process, but if you haven't yet started, start small things, but feed it in. And I absolutely agree that sometimes this can be a bit of a sort of a side project. Okay, we'll have a strategy afternoon talking about what this is going to look like for us going forward, and we create these wonderful documents that then sit up on a shelf and they don't make meaningful impact. And I think that the things that we've worked with where it's been very successful has been where it's actually been drawn into business as usual. And you can find different ways to do that. But don't do it on your own. Get lots of people involved in it. And today's a great example of that.
Do we have any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Or even if you've got any kind of shared examples that...
Sorry, you stick. Yeah, there we go. Hi. Nuha, have I said that correct? Yeah. You mentioned about buzzwords, and it is something that actually, as I'm creating feedback with the microphone, as I'm creating messaging to communicate to an audience in the outside world, I'm really conscious that some people associate words like sustainability, like green, like eco-friendly as being a buzzword, whereas actually our values and our mission needs to communicate that to our audience. So how would you differentiate between a business that aren't necessarily aligned with values or a mission and using buzzwords, for example, because it's not just BS bingo or buzzword bingo, whatever you call it. How would you differentiate as a part of that audience, just out of curiosity?
Sorry, you can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, I think it's absolutely okay to use those words as long as you're actually incorporating those practices into your business. Because as like a younger consumer, I think we tend to look into companies' practices when we're like thinking of, oh, do we want to like buy from them? Do we want to have them as like a long-term kind of investment? We just don't want, I think, companies just using these words for attention and not actually then that being a practice that they actually incorporate. So it's like, I think those words only become buzzwords when you only use them without meaning or without intention.
So one of the, because I've got a business myself, I think one of the things I was always worried about was subcontracting, because you always want to make sure that if you're subcontracting work, that the people that you're hiring are, you know, doing the right things ethically. So I think for me it was always, how do I check that they're ethical and they're sustainable, and you know, and all these things. I don't know, do you have anything on that?
So, I mean, there's some easy ways to do it, because there's now, you know, recognised labels. And I noticed that on some of the boards outside, people are sort of showcasing their B Corp status. So that's a kind of a quick win on there. But I think it's completely fair and right to be starting to ask your supply chain for their various, if they've got impact reports, evidence that they're doing these things as well. In the same way that particularly small businesses are starting to get asked that from further up the supply chain. If you're in the public sector at all, delivering sort of grant-based work, you'll find that there are now big sections of the forms where you now have to actually state what it is, what you're doing, and your commitment to these things. So this is, if you're not inspired because it's the right thing to do or because it's what's going to be expected of your employees, you definitely should be inspired by the fact that this is where business is going and it's going to become the new norm. So finding ways to capture it, measure it, showcase it is going to become something that everyone's going to have to do. And so in your turn, you are right to ask that from your supply chain. And build relationships with them that means that you know that that's true.
And obviously, you know, we're talking about sustainability, and, you know, when you first start this entrepreneurial journey or you've got your business, it's all about, oh, we want a physical space. But I think if we're talking about climate spaces and, you know, sustainability, in my head now is, do we need a space? Do we just remote work? Do we need all these overheads and, you know, extra electricity bills and all these things? So I don't know, do a lot of you here have physical spaces? Yeah, you don't have. You have, and how do you feel about yourself? I'm gonna ask you, Andrew. But yeah, does that make you think right now when you talk about, you know, sustainability? Do we need spaces?
Yeah, I think it makes us think about why we use the space. To be honest, I mean, our landlords is a socially trading organisation, so it's a community interest company that kind of gives money back into the creative and digital sector in Liverpool. So that's a reason that we're with them. They are taking kind of steps and strides, kind of certainly since the pandemic, to look at kind of sustainability and their kind of business practices, which I think they were getting a lot of pressure from their tenants to do. But I think for us, it's about kind of thinking about why we use the space and the reason we go to work, and actually the reason we go to work is to be part of a community with other organisations. And so for us, you know, it's to be able to have conversations with other organisations about the issues we care about, and really that was our rationale for continuing to use a space.
That's really interesting. Do we have any more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a very quick point, because this comes up a lot about the challenges now as people came back from the pandemic, and whether or not in some cases businesses have downsized offices. Is just to bear in mind that there is a possibility that you could just be pushing the problem down the road. So is it more environmentally friendly to have one office that 50 people travel to but then work in and heat, or to have 50 separate homes heated throughout the day? So, and I'm not suggesting that one is better than the other, but it's definitely something that needs to be thought about, because there are some companies, which I won't name right here, I'm sure we all know about, who are very, very guilty of making it an individual problem and not actually thinking about that from the company's problem. So I appreciate that's a layer of complexity, but there we go.
No, but it's true though, isn't it? Because I know when we were thinking about going back into the office, they gave people a choice. So everyone was given a choice, whereas, funny enough, I think it was back in 2012, I requested to work remotely. So some time in the office, some time at home, and I was a new mum at the time, and I was travelling back and forth, and I remember being told no, in no uncertain terms. And it's funny now, because, you know, we're talking 10 years later, and I'm being told, oh, you can work from home. You know, and the thing is, we still have the same technology. Nothing's changed. Zoom's always existed. You know, all these things. Google Meet has always existed. But it's funny how it took a pandemic to allow people, especially women actually, to be able to work remotely. So I think, so it's an interesting one. But one of the big things for me about hybrid working is, like you said, Nuha, about embracing new environments as well. You know, taking your laptop to the park, or supporting other businesses. So I try and hot desk in different businesses, sustainable businesses, and support them and be part of that wider community and know what they're talking about. So I think, it's really important. Any more questions? Or any examples of best practices that you've seen? Janine.
Thank you. I'm just going to go back to the word buzzword, because I'm sitting here feeling irritated, so I hope that's okay. I think, Nuha, you said it beautifully. As long as it has meaning, you nailed that. But Sarah, I want to ask you, in your work, I think it really belittles the desire and the purpose we have to change and grow, to jump on this, to use the term buzzwords, because if I want to be something, I have to feel the humility and take a journey. And there's greenwashing to call out buzzwords, but I just feel like, can we not belittle a journey that we're taking, and can we just be... So I'm just wondering how you deal with that on a practical level, and can we all stop saying buzzword? Sorry, that's my little irritation. I'm just wondering what your response is on a practical level.
Well, I mean, I absolutely agree. Obviously, it's a huge issue for businesses generally to try to communicate what they're doing. And if we have a shared understanding of what those words mean, then we should be using them. I mean, I absolutely wholeheartedly agree that it's the purpose and the intent that sits behind them. The same companies that are using these things as promotional tools are quite quickly, guilty of using the next set of buzzwords. So I think this is about a practice that's embedded within your business that's meaningful. But I don't think that necessarily means that we should stop using such words, because actually that is what people understand and that we can communicate with them to have that shared understanding. It just means that at some point you might get that challenge of, you say you're doing this, show me. Prove it. Where's the evidence that this is actually what you think and believe? And I think you might have a session later around sort of measuring some of this stuff. And for me, that's hugely important. It's not just about, a quick thing that you can implement, but how do you measure that it's actually having a change, and what can you say that you've done? And if you can turn that into some statistics, even better. Hannah?
I've got 2 points. I think because I've been working in marketing for a long time, so buzzwords, that term is something that has been around forever. But what I've noticed, particularly with Faith in Nature in the past few years, is that the relationship actually between brands and consumers has massively changed. And it's the intersection between this whole topic and the state of the world and digital really transformation, which has provoked that and accelerated that change. And I think in my experience, what I find is that if you show that humility, if you feel it first and you show it, then the relationship between the brand and the consumer changes, and it becomes a lot more honest, and it becomes more like a genuine conversation. You know, for us to put nature on the board was quite frightening, because it was opening up this whole conversation. We are a business which still sells water. We're a business which still sells plastics. And a lot of this was more about asking the question rather than having the answer. And so I think that if you as a business genuinely feel that humility, it will come through in your communications. So that's my first point. I think the next point is on the space question, because it's a really interesting one. Faith in Nature's, as an example, transitioned at the same time as COVID and everything else happened. We transitioned from a small to a medium-sized business. And it's definitely a question of size, I think, in some ways, that the way that people connect. And actually what we found was that the space became more important as our vision became more real for us. We needed a space to connect the vision with the people. And that became one of the main reasons that people really wanted to come to work and work together. And now we have a lovely space where we all, you know, we enjoy socialising and talking about these topics together. So I think space is really important. More important than I could have anticipated, I think, at the beginning of the whole journey. And then I was thinking about your presentation and the question of the space, the greenery. It feels like it could be just an aesthetic choice, you know, or it could, you know, if you're a business that sells products, maybe you think it's a bit false, it's a bit markety, it's a bit, you know, but it really counts. Like, it really counts for people. So I think that space is the place where you connect people with what you feel as a business. And it also attracts better people. Actually, it attracts people who are more right for you as a business. So I'd say that's another important point. It's not one model fits all.
I'm electric. I think it's God's gift. Oh, got a handle. Fantastic. I feel like Annika Rice. I think the room is too young to remember Annika Rice.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I definitely remember Annika Rice. You were talking about space, Hannah, and hold this further away. And I think the whole issue of space is really, really important. But I'm going to think about and talk about and invite your thinking about space as in a slightly different way, in terms of how we hold space with people in our teams, and how indeed we give ourselves space to actually do that standing back and checking through, are we up to where we want to be? But there are mechanisms to do that, and I'm sure a lot of you know a lot of them, but time to think, I would really, really recommend. You've probably come across it. Nancy Klein's work, absolutely fantastic for listening, asking questions, not knowing the answers as leaders, but inviting new and creative ideas from anyone in the team. With this approach, everyone comes into the room as an equal. And again, people have bravery to talk when they couldn't speak before. So I'd really recommend that to people. And if anyone wants to talk more, very happy to.
That's brilliant. Oh, God. I think, I totally agree with that. Not always thinking you know the answers, but inviting people for that conversation. And I think that's always been the problem, is so-called leaders thinking they need to have the answers and just, what's the word I'm looking for? Faking it. Faking it, and then making people who actually know the answers feel belittled about it. You know, I think that's really important, where the big conversations that's been happening right now is, you know, making sure that we have even junior members of the team being involved in these conversations, because a lot of us, you know, we come from different backgrounds, different types of families, And people just don't realise that you're coming in with so much information. I'll give you a quick example. So I've been really fortunate. So my dad worked for United Nations, so he travelled across Africa and Asia, well, all over the world actually. So and my granddad was a journalist. So I had all these, all this information. But when I came into the industry, the media industry, with a lot of education that came from my family, people missed out on that because they saw me as a runner, and sometimes people just don't realise a lot of young people are coming in with amazing experience and just know-how, and just giving them a chance to actually say what they think the solution could be, and listening to them. Any more questions? Do we have any best practices? Listen to the conversation. Is there anything that you've seen globally that you think we should be adopting in this country? Because I think for me, I love to travel, and I think in the UK, we are really behind when it comes to sustainability, but I think we still have this kind of Great Britain ego-ness where we think we can solve the world's problems, but actually we are so behind. I used to work for the World Service, and I would go to Kenya, Nairobi quite a bit. And I don't know, has anyone visited Kenya before? And you're not allowed to bring plastics in. You're not allowed to bring a plastic bag, and you can get fined at the airport if you bring in a plastic bag. So the first time we went, I remember one of my colleagues said, listen, if you've got a plastic bag, there's a bit you need to put in the bin, and there's a sign as well. And I remember leaving the airport thinking, oh my goodness. But then in this country, when people think about Africa or Asia, they'll be thinking, oh, they haven't got a clue about sustainability. But actually, a lot of these countries are solving problems a lot better than us. And actually, the pollution that they've got in those countries is because they're burning our waste. We're making their country really dirty. So I think that was one thing that I saw that I thought, why haven't we implemented that in this country? So there's a lot of things that I think I've seen, from different countries that I think we should be adopting. And for some odd reason, I just don't understand why we haven't done it yet. It's unbelievable. Anyone else? Oh, did you want to say something? I can see you. Go on. Say it. It's a room full of friends. Annika Rice is coming.
Just on that point and sort of attempting to answer that question, I can't remember which bit of training it was recently, but it was talking about how the awareness, that's it, the language of sustainability talk that I attended last week was talking about how the awareness of the climate issues is so much higher in countries through Africa, etc., in those climate vulnerable countries. So perhaps part of the problem is that because we're not seeing those effects so much, perhaps that's slightly becoming more of a thing with heat waves, etc. But I really think that's because we're not as vulnerable to it. We haven't been faced with the dire need to act so quickly.
Oh, goodness. I think there was a long time that I think it was me and you, Andrew, years ago, and was it Think Tank Ghana? Yes. There was I don't know, has anyone heard of Think Tank Ghana? So Think Tank Ghana, if there's any kind of, it's all to do with like recycling and sustainability. So if there's any issues in I think it's anywhere in the world that you're trying to unpick, you can send it to them, and then they kind of help you unpick it. Because as you mentioned, we're in our heads, we are not there yet to be panicking, but actually in the next few years we are, we will be. So it's looking at what they're doing. But Think Tank Ghana was a really good one that I absolutely loved. I'm going to run back up again. What's the best way of getting to you? I'm coming. Get me best angle on camera. I'm joking.
I loved what you were saying about young people and the experience they have that is ignored. And I love the point you were making about embedding this kind of thinking in decision making. And it seems to me some of us will know the initiative Boardroom 2030, which is all about giving young people a voice in the governance of organizations. And if we go back to the heart of what sustainability is all about. It's well-being for the future generations. And if we can bring those young people with their experience, their diverse experiences, into boardrooms, shadowing decision-making, getting involved in framing what the business does, then I think we're going to be able to make real substantive progress.
Oh, you know what? This is funny, isn't it? I've been trying to ask you all for the past 45 minutes. Do you have any questions? And we've run out of time, and you want to ask a question? You know what? Can we, Andrew? Can we ask one more question? Yeah. One more question. Because it's you.
Thank you for the time. So I'm privileged enough to run Bright Green Future, which the amazing Nuha is an alumni of. And yeah, an environmental leadership program trying to increase the diversity of young people in climate spaces. And one of the things we're starting to introduce is this idea of long-termism and thinking beyond our generation. Probably many of this room listened in lockdown to the Long Time Academy, the podcast, which was basically this idea of what does it do when you think beyond yourself in terms of time? And you know, that idea of being on boards and stuff is all kind of good, but there's so much pressure on, like it says on our little labels here, because we're running a workshop, change maker, which is great. And like, oh, young person, you're a change maker. And it's like, that's a lot to deal with. If you're a 17-year-old, you're going to be the future. You've got it. You're the generation that's going to solve it. And one of the ways on Bright Green Future we, I think, start to deal with that is, what if it's not all about you? Right, what if you're just, as they call it, cathedral thinking, if you're just putting a stone as part of the solution, you're not the solution itself. And I think if businesses can do that as well, that could potentially be a bit of a solution.
So we have run out of time. Let me come back. We are going to ask our panelists an action that we would like you to take away as well. But before we take that action, I've got a fantastic quote that I love to go to, and it's Confucius, and I love Confucius. And it says, it doesn't matter how slow you go as long as you don't stop. And I think that's what to take away, isn't it? I think it's not about putting pressure on yourself, but making sure that you're implementing small steps at a time to get to where it is you think, you know, that journey takes you and where you should be. I think there's a lot of pressure on so many people right now just to survive. And, you know, 2023, I've said for myself, it's about thriving, not surviving. So not feeling as if you can change things overnight. So that's my takeaway. Sarah, what is your action, your action for this group today?
So I think just probably to go back to some of the things I was talking about earlier, I would say pick 2-3 things that you could immediately change tomorrow in your business or in your individual practice that would make a difference, and have a think about how you could measure the impact of that in a year's time, and think about what that might mean and how that might look, and how could you definitely know that what you've done is making that impact. So start small, but make some really positive changes that you know that can last.
That was exactly what I was gonna say. I was gonna say, like, baby steps, and the best way to start is like in your personal life, and that way you can use the smaller practice and expand it into your professional life as well. And it's easier. It's kind of takes the pressure off. You don't need to do anything really big or really huge to start off.
And that is the closing for today's session. Thank you for your amazing energy. And yeah, thank you.